Hello and welcome to Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life. This is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, Johanna. Hey, Johanna.
Hi, Jared.
What are we going to talk about today?
Homework.
That's my favorite. What are we going to talk about homework?
Whether a teacher should assign it or not, or have it as a part of their class, or grade it, or it's a hot topic, the homework.
What's the answer?
It's complicated.
Yes or no? What's the answer?
Yes, as long as it meets certain requirements.
All right, what are those requirements?
One, there needs to be a purpose to every single assignment that's very clear to kids.
Purpose.
A reason.
And the kids need to know it?
Yes, not just why it's good for the whole class, but why they need to do it.
What's an example of a purpose for the kids?
Sure. Give me a course.
Chemistry.
Okay. I'm not sure I ever took chemistry in high school. Okay, but I will give you an example. Oh, no, wait. I did mentor a student who was a chemistry teacher. Okay, so in chemistry, you might want students to prepare for a lab, to understand how a lab's going to go down, because you only have 42 minutes, and if they don't use every single minute appropriately, then they won't get their experiment done.
Okay.
And so you might assign to them reviewing the steps or the process of the actual lab.
And then they'll actually do that.
They won't if that's how you assign it, but yes, that would be from an adult's perspective, we can see why a student would do that and should prepare for that.
So that's an example of the purpose. How do you get them to actually do it?
Well, they have to feel like they have to.
And how do you do that?
I tend to let them learn by doing it incorrectly.
So you might run the lab and have them not actually get the answer done?
Right.
And then say, well, here's what you need to read up on before tomorrow's class so that you can actually accomplish your goal in the next lab?
No, more like it has to be like a discovery. So the student, okay, let's use this chemistry example and keep going. So a lot of times you as a teacher will foresee, right, that if kids don't understand the lab before it happens, then it's not going to go well. And if they don't understand how to read quickly the different equations or symbols or codes within chemistry, or don't know what a word means, then also the lab isn't going to go well. But we want students to experience what it is like when they don't do the homework.
So your first time they're going to fail, probably?
Kind of. You purposely, if homework is important and you want the vast majority of students to do it, then they have to feel what it is like not doing it, and then they have to come up with their own solution. Act clueless. Okay, so that lab didn't go very well. Before we do it again, because realize you're going to have to repeat everything, what can we do as a class so that we're more prepared when it's time to do a lab?
I like this because I wrote an entire 4 pages or something on a teacher evaluation, a professor evaluation when I was a freshman, when I still went to class.
Oh, of course you wrote a 4-page teacher evaluation.
It was like a philosophy class.
Uh-huh.
And consistently it was frustrating for her and everyone because she would assign reading and then no one would do the reading because the only thing that happened when you didn't do the reading is that she went over everything you needed to know anyway. But while getting frustrated that no one could contribute to the conversation.
Right.
But it was in any individual's interest to just put up with the frustration because you were going to get all the content you needed anyway from just listening.
Of course.
And the reading was a lot of work because it was annoying philosophy writing that's hard to think about and parse.
Correct. So yes.
And I wrote a whole if you want people to do the reading, it's too tempting not to, the way that you run things.
Correct.
So they're making. I wasn't an economist yet, but I was on my way to explaining to the philosopher professor the economics of classroom time. But my little anecdote just makes me feel what you're saying. Yeah, if there's no failure, if you don't, then there's never going to be a purpose.
Right. And this is going along with everything else that we've discussed those first couple of weeks, and how my classes oftentimes are very slow to get going because you're intentionally setting up these experiences where it doesn't work. And it can be really hard as a teacher to decide that you're going to have a class experience that doesn't work. And that might mean that you shut it down 15 minutes into this and just say like, so does anyone feel like they're learning? And when the answer is no, then you go through the post-mortem as a class and figure out, okay, we're going to just do this all again. What do we think we need to do so we have a better experience?
Like you say, is part of your broader message of it's worth spending time to make better learners.
And you're going to get feedback that you don't anticipate. Here's a really good example. When I was a younger teacher and I didn't yet have kids, I thought it made sense to assign homework on a Monday, even if they felt a purpose for what we needed for Tuesday's class. But by talking to my students, I learned that 24-hour turnaround is not enough time for them. And so they needed a lot longer lead time for when to complete learning, just because they're kids and because they worked or they were in sports and they had a game.
Yeah, they might be busy all Monday night.
And different kids had different schedules, so it wasn't like I could just say, well, we won't assign something on a Wednesday. And so we as a class had to come up with how we were going to assign tasks. And so essentially what worked well for all my classes was that there were a list of objectives that you had to get done for the Monday of the following week. And then kids essentially could pick when to get those objectives done. Now, you're going to have kids not do it. And let's kind of table that. But if you make it experienced, like kids see what it's like to not be prepared, and B, have the kids have a role in determining what preparedness looks like, and what the homework structure looks like, which is how I even went to flipped instruction in the first place. Kids got frustrated trying to do the learning at home. They said it was easier for them to get directions, and then that's how I got to video, because the kids said they were just honest. They're like, I'm not going to do it if I have to read something, but if I have to listen to something or watch something, then I'll do it.
Yes. Kids these days.
But we're not much different, are we? Like, how many books do you listen to versus books that you read?
Sure, but I still get angry when I want to look up how to do something, and the only way to find it is a YouTube video where someone introduces things for like 4 minutes and then tells me how, instead of just a simple set of written instructions.
I know, but if people only read, I would be writing a book and we wouldn't have this podcast.
I went to look up how to change the agenda text or just the notes of an Outlook meeting without sending an update to everyone. I got a very helpful, only 3-minute long YouTube video, but the first 2 minutes of the 3 minutes was explaining why I might want to change the text without sending an update. I'm like, sir, in all of the internet, I found your YouTube video on how to do this. What do you think the odds are I don't already have my own reasons as to why I might want to? I wasn't just browsing things to do on Outlook. It's like, oh, that occurs to me that might be a good thing to do.
Maybe we need to change the theme of this podcast from homework to things that made Jared grumpy.
Well, homework is one of them. Let's address purpose a little bit more. And speaking of me being grumpy, when I was a wee lad, the purpose of homework was to mostly show that you did your homework, I think. this is back more in the boot polishing days of education, where you learn to be responsible by having a chore every night, and then we check to see that you did your chore the next day, and the purpose was to not get in trouble for not having done it. Is this a good purpose?
I think that depends on the course, because what if I was teaching a foreign language course, in which case practicing for a short period every single evening has real value and purpose. And
yeah, but wouldn't a better purpose be to just make you talk in class and then feel like you didn't know how to say anything?
Well, it's kind of like, do you make our kid practice piano?
Yes.
Why?
Because otherwise you won't be good at it.
Right, because it takes one exposure, even for a long period of time, for certain things is not good. If you're trying to, there is a time and a place for memorization. And if you need to memorize something, 24 hours of...
I'm not talking about just memorizing something. I'm saying the point of the homework was basically to have done the homework.
Well, but it's probably math, in which case repracticing several hours after learning something helps you remember what you learned. I'm just saying.
This is inconsistent with the previous message of your podcast.
It is not.
It is.
It is saying that you have to have a purpose.
So any purpose is fine?
As long as the kid values the purpose, yes, it is fine. Think about it. I always did my homework because I valued the purpose of my teacher being pleased with me, or my parents not being angry with me. Like, you cannot like that purpose. You cannot like why I always did my homework. We could argue that it isn't a good purpose, but it was like, that's why I did it.
This doesn't seem consistent with your overall philosophy.
Which is what?
I'm different than this.
Okay. This means that I'm not actually a huge advocate of homework.
Why are you defending pointless homework then?
Because I do think that there's a time and a place in very specific circumstances for when homework is good.
Yeah, but you just got done saying you want to have it meaningful to what they're experiencing in the classroom.
Correct.
And if the only consequence to not doing your homework is that you get frowny faces from your teacher instead of smiley faces from your teacher, that's not actually meaningful to their classroom experience.
Let's back up. Let's take this foreign language experience. If you as a teacher know if they practice just memorization of a core set of terms per unit, and that will help them be more successful because they will have a vocabulary to draw from when engaging in the rest of the learning or the need to communicate in this foreign language, you would have to set up for the kids an experiment of what it feels like to do 10 minutes worth of practice, maybe 3 times a week, versus what happens when they don't do any practice but do it in all the work in class. And if kids self-realize, 10-minute chunks for a total of 30 minutes a week drastically impacts the scores that I get in this course, then kids will see value in the practice for practice sake, and they'll do it.
Right.
But if all you do is say you have to practice your flashcards 3 times a week for 10 minutes, and you have to have a parent sign a form, and a kid never realizes why they should be doing this because they never feel not doing it, they never feel the actual science experiment, then it is pointless.
Right.
Okay.
That's consistent with your previous statements just a few minutes ago.
Okay.
But you could say, I think in that situation, rather than assigning homework, that you check like you're a drill sergeant checking that the beds are made correctly. You're just going to say, hey, it's time to do our one-on-one conversation in front of the class over the stuff that we learned last time. And just say, did you practice them or not? And I don't really care what you did. Just let's be conscious right now before you do it of, did you do the practice that I suggested you do? And then you say no.
Oh, no, they're not going to say that. They're going to lie to you.
No, fine, but at least...
They're going to look you in the eyes and lie to you.
They can lie.
Particularly a yes or no question.
You don't really need to care. I mean, they can lie. What matters is they're conscious of whether they did or not in their own mind. And then they do their thing. And they either feel success or failure. And then you're giving them their own feedback on what it felt like without having done the thing that you thought they needed to do.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
But it's not like homework.
No.
Is that like checking homework like it's a chore, like it's a task, like it's like, oh, you were responsible because you didn't do your homework, so you get a demerit?
Yes. Okay.
What it is it's a just teaching them that you wouldn't ask for it unless they need it for their learning and classroom experience.
Correct.
And letting them feel the failure of not doing what you wisely, presumably, suggested that they do.
Right, but humans are humans, and so we all know what we should do, and then we don't do it unless structures are created that help support us as making good choices.
Such as?
Okay, so once you've got the kids talked into the fact that they need to be doing whatever it is you think they need to do. And if you think they need to do it and you can't get their buy-in, like you can't get them to come up with this on their own, that, hey, I know what would be better. Let's practice our words for small chunks of time on our own time. Well, then that's a sign that either A, you created a poor science experiment, or B, what you think that they need to do is not. Like, if you can't get them to come up with it on their own, it's not going to work. So then you need to create a system that helps support good choices. And I tend to do this by having community checklists.
Tell me about community checklists.
Okay, so when I gave tests that happened to be like there's a time and a place, and sometimes we need to just learn some vocabulary. So when I had a vocabulary test, I would have a checklist that had 5 steps on them, and they couldn't take the test unless all the steps were done by all the people in their group.
Okay.
So let's say I took the vocabulary terms and I broke it into, like, you're going to get instruction in class, and then you're going to play some games. That's another step. And then you're going to a formative assessment to see how you're doing with the learning. And then you're going to either do more game practice independently, or you're going to work with the teacher. And then the last step is you're going to take the test.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you put kids into groups. And then it's like, what's that when you do carry like a ruck pack, or you as a team have to run a relay and you can't leave any man behind, and you can't run ahead.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, I ran it like that.
Yeah, what are those called? They like run through mud and stuff?
Yes,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay. So again, it's kind of like a game. Groups tested on different days. And when they got done testing, there was an anchor activity, which we've talked about in future podcasts. So there's like a fun...
In future podcasts, we have...
Oh, not future, past.
Past.
So there's like a fun reason that was still based in the learning. In my case, it happened to be application-based. Their goal was to stay ahead of the teaching pacing.
Sure.
Yes.
What?
So, like, I would say you had to have step 1 done by such and such day. You had to have step 2 done by such and such time. Step 3. And if you fell behind, then you are taken out of the pacing, and the teacher controlled the learning for that day until you caught up.
Got it. As a group of like 4.
Right.
And this includes homework.
Well, no. Those kids would self-assign themselves homework to stay ahead of the pacing so that they would have time to do the fun anchor activity.
Got it. So all you did was set the pace.
All I did was set the pace.
And they just, through their peer group influence on each other, figured out that the pace required a bit of practice.
Yes, and I didn't do what some teachers would think is put one of the kids that struggles with homework completion or doing what they're supposed to in each group. No. I put all those kiddos in the same group, and it was based off of how quickly I thought the student could learn the learning and just behaviors. So just because a kid was super smart and learned quickly didn't mean they were in the fastest paced group if I knew their behaviors would slow down that group. On the other hand, if I have a kid that maybe struggled with learning, but man, their like motivation was high to learn, I might put them with kids that learn more quickly because like that would help the whole team, you know? So you really kind of have to, and it sounds like that's complex to do, but once you learn your kids, it's a lot less work to put them in teams that will cause like motivation out of 95% of your kids than to deal with trying to self-motivate each kid through stuff that's hard or boring.
Yeah, and always remember that standing at a lectern and addressing all of them at the same is definitely not motivating many of them, right?
It's probably not, no.
Probably.
You don't know. We're not every person.
Yeah.
I
know.
happen to love a good sit and get because I don't have to do anything if I'm a student. And all
I don't have to do
sit
anything.
And a get.
That sounds like a super motivated learner right there. I don't have to do anything. So, yeah, nailed it. You really showed me about how motivated someone could be because they might show up and be like, oh, I don't have to do anything. This is great.
It can be simple things. Like I could have the motivator be if you got done by Wednesday, you then got to choose a partner and the anchor activity or anchor learning experience you got to do with a friend of your choosing as long as they also finished. And if they were in a different group, well, then that group had to also finish on it. So it like spreads faster than you realize. Now, the first time it's not going to spread. I should say that. The first time they're going to have to feel their choices.
Right.
And then you got to have them like post-mortem the thing and figure out, well, what could we have done differently? And then try again.
And then your low motivation groups are just cast off and don't learn anything?
No.
Because...
Well, they're working with me. They probably are on the teacher pacing, and
this is what I expected you to say.
You would be surprised, though. Now, they take longer to learn the lesson. But it would be rare by the end of a semester for me to still have a group of kids that required... I might have one or two in a class that required teacher pacing. But oftentimes that one or two would switch out. Like all of a sudden you get a kid that had the flu or they broke up with someone. Or like at the elementary level, who knows what's going on at home. But all of a sudden the kid just needs to be paced with the teacher.
But you're not just abandoning the quote, bad ones. Because worst case scenario, those are the ones where you get your intervention. Yes.
And I'm teaching them the exacts at any time. I can take every group and have the whole thing be teacher controlled. But this will cause them to naturally assign themselves homework. And they'll work harder than if... And it allows them to, as a group, kind of self-assign when, it takes the burden off of you as a teacher.
Yeah. You're harnessing the energy where it is and then focusing your energy where it's needed. Correct. Okay, good. Smart, I think. Probably. Sounds good to me.
I have found in many different content-specific courses that it works really well. And based on the age of the student, the amount of time they need to learn the lesson, and the frequency of needing to learn the lesson sometimes shifts. High school kids, once they start a countdown, they need the lesson more often. And then middle school kids, sometimes a sixth grader or a seventh grader just isn't ready for it yet. But which is weird because then you can get a fourth grader that totally just, I don't know, something weird happens to kids when they get. Teachers I've tried to work with, we had some issues with a sixth grade and a seventh grade. But otherwise...
And you sort of introduced this section by talking about rote memorization. I don't know if that was just the transition or if you meant this community checklist idea for rote practice, like foreign language or anatomy or art history, just things.
You love anatomy. You mentioned that one a lot.
Well, anatomy is a really good example of there's just nothing to do except for learn the names. right?
Yes.
There's no
there's
no making a collage. There's no like sharing stories of like experiential learning or something. It's
an
just
AP
committing
course is
it's just committing the names of the bones to memory.
An AP course is a perfect example, but most courses, there's just a root amount of content that, like, as much as our administration wants to be like...
A what amount?
Just a root.
A root amount?
Yeah, like a fundamental amount of...
So like a 6 root?
No, like roots of a tree.
Yeah.
Like...
Usually we don't think of roots as like an amount.
Well, I think of like if you don't have strong roots...
Okay.
Then you can't... So administration will constantly say to you, like, well, where's the deep level? Where's the high Bloom's taxonomy? And I am the first person to say that you need application, but...
Math facts.
You
just got to know how to add and multiply single-digit numbers.
There's a certain point at which you need to have a base level of knowledge in order to build up the application knowledge on. And that tends to be where homework is grounded. Now, if you teach a course where all you have is memorization, like, I might relook at that curriculum and ask yourself whether that's really what the curriculum is asking me to do, and how I can switch it so it's not all I do. I had a course once that had, we had 144 vocabulary words where kids had to be able to identify, apply, and like just regurgitate what the word meant. And it was a semester-long course. And even then, like, under this system, my kids learned all of those terms much faster, even though they were totally foreign to the kids. There wasn't a lot that they could attach the term to that they already knew. But this caused that to go much faster. Not at the beginning.
Much faster than what? Like, what are the alternatives to teaching that type of thing that you're suggesting you do your way instead?
Where you have, like,
20
to 50 words a unit, and you have the kid write the word, write the definition, then you have the kid like play a game, then you have, and it's like, this is a Monday, then this is Tuesday, and then the test is on Friday, and then you repeat. Doing this instead is much better.
Yeah, I can't use my examples anymore because you always say, well, no one teaches like that anymore, but I don't really believe you.
Okay.
But yeah, just like assigning worksheets.
Yes, worksheets.
And then coming in the next morning and then saying, okay, everyone listen and check your work as a class based upon what you put on the worksheet, saying the words and quizzing random people in class whether they know that particular word, and everyone who knows it hopes they get called on, and everyone who knows it knows they're only, or doesn't know it, knows they're only going to get called on once, and therefore they don't really need to know anything. Right? Why are you laughing?
Because I'm remembering I used to always raise my hand as soon as I knew an answer, because once I answered one thing, they weren't going to call on me again. So if you got that answer and you knew right away, then you were like, woo, home free.
It's kind of doing what you're talking about. It's trying to create a consequence, is that you feel good or bad in that moment because you knew the thing you were supposed to know or you didn't. It's just a really scattershot, inefficient method of achieving it compared to what you're suggesting, which is these community checklists.
Well, and I actually had another component. We've talked about this in past podcasts where, like, essentially you had to get a certain score on this test or you went down the chute and you had to start over with different components, which was like you had to be a part of the teacher group and get re-taught, and then you had to do re-practicing, and then you had to redo a formative assessment, and then you took the test again. And that in the group mentality is really helpful. But it can get kind of tricky depending on your school district. You don't want to be exposing kids' grades to other kids. So
sure.
That's kind of maybe future podcast. I can explain how I did that.
And the idea behind that is you don't want, ideally, people to know just enough to score a passing grade on the assessment, right? You want them over-prepared.
I want them getting an A or a B.
Right.
I mean, that quite honestly was my goal when I was doing root memorization. Rote memorization.
Roots are on the trees.
Roots are on their trees.
They're an amount of the tree. Some amount of the tree is composed of roots.
Yes.
Rote is the thing where you just have to memorize things.
Yes. Like, I needed, I wanted my scores high. But B, if I didn't have at least 80%, then I wasn't sure they could do the application component because they didn't have enough.
And would you just say that's a risk of driving things by assessment, is like you want to guard against them cramming, passing the test and then moving on and not really knowing things that well?
They will. So you have to have a well-written test, and you have to be prepared that they're going to try and do that. And if they naturally feel the consequence of that not working, then they won't.
Well, not even natural. A little bit unnatural is what I'm suggesting here, is you make the consequences a little bit harsher than just, well, you didn't pass, I guess you'll have to come back. You knock them down some as a sort of artificial negative consequence that gives them an encouragement to make sure they know more than the test is going to ask of them before they try it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what do you think, Jared? Do you think we have conquered all that is when you should and shouldn't do homework?
Let me recap.
Okay, recap us. Let's see
if I have it. We're trying a new thing where I write down things.
we are trying a new thing. We'll have to see if people like this better.
We need to have a purpose. The kids need to feel a purpose for the homework.
Yeah.
Which can be just that you're going to yell at them if they don't do it.
You can try that.
I would suggest that that's not really the best way.
That's what I would say is not the best way.
Not the best way. The best way is that they just experience failure, natural failure in the classroom. Like, they're expected to be able to do this. They can't. No one likes that. And
reading directions where they don't know what the directions say because they don't know what the words inside the directions mean. That's a really good one.
And then you suggest harnessing small group power, like you do a lot.
Yes.
And assigning like skill, not necessarily like skill, but like motivation groups.
And speed of learning, but being willing to go outside the confounds of both in preference for behaviors. Grouping, not like, oh, that's a good kid that's quiet, but like, that's a good kid that takes learning by the horns.
Right. And then you set a pace for them. You said, these are your objectives. This is what you need to learn by X, by Y, by Z date. Just like you would if you were standing and lecturing. We would have a plan to take the whole class to X, Y, and Z by a certain amount of time. We
didn't say it, but clearly pre-assessment is necessary to give purpose to, like, I have to do these 5 steps because I just pre-assessed. Like, I don't know, let's say the test has 100 questions on it and there's 10 questions I pre-assessed on and it was a train wreck, then...
Right. Which is, again, a part of experiencing failure.
Yes.
And then the fast learning, highly motivated groups will just cruise.
Oh, they'll go very fast. It'll be stressful in the beginning how fast they go.
But then the secret part, and the reason that this is on the homework podcast, is that they will create homework for themselves because they only move on as a group, right?
Yes, if you make the steps. So let's say I'm teaching in a math course or in that foreign language course. If I make one of the steps that they have to do 20 minutes of practice in 5-minute chunks, like... that's, you just put into the steps what you as a teacher would assign as homework, and they'll naturally be like, what if we just did that?
Right.
Or we have to go do Kahoot or something or whatever. I should say what I'm describing is called a mapped learning progression.
Yes. Mapped learning progression.
Yes. Trademark Johanna.
Really?
Yeah. I think that this is a Johanna invention.
What does the mapped part mean? Like map, like a cartographer makes?
Yes.
It's not like an acronym for like maximizing active participation or something.
No. Ooh, I like that though.
No, please don't.
No, it means an actual map of how the learning happens, and different people might have, I call it a map because on a map could be several ways to get to the same destination. And so what I described is very, clinical with just a step 1, step 2, step 3. But if you get more advanced with them, you can have different speeds and options and routes to get to the same place.
Just doesn't super fit with the rest, but we talked about it and I wrote it down. If you were assigning traditional homework, pro tip is give a longer time frame than 1 day.
Yes.
Like don't ask for it. Don't need it until a few days out because kids are busy and they might not have time to do it on any given weeknight.
Yes, I have gotten pushback about that from math teachers. I will say that. Math teachers are convinced
Math teachers are convinced of a lot of things.
That kids can't do the homework until they're exposed to the learning, and that they have to do the practice the night immediately after the learning. And that's a whole nother conversation, but I would say take a moment to just think outside the box and ask the kids to help create a system, and then you're more likely to have them do it.
Yeah, we should have a fight me math teacher episode.
You say that you're like a math person.
You don't want to say anything bad about math teachers, but I will. It's like, do you guys feel like you're really doing a good job overall? Like all the people that come out of high school and
My mouth is just open.
And say, "Oh, I love math. I'm great at math." That's what's happening. Is that what you feel like when you look around at the world? All the people like, "Oh yeah, math is the best."
I do think they're doing a good job with math.
Go survey just normal humans in the world and be like, "Hey, did you feel like you learned math well in school? Do you like math?" And then over 50% are going to say, "Oh no, I'm bad at math."
Yeah, but okay, that's a whole. We'll add that to the podcast list because people would say that about art.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there's
too. I think even more people would say they're bad
as the expert on this podcast. This is just my opinion. I am good at math.
You're extremely good at math.
I think that because of what you're talking about, in part of like this paradigm that it can only be we teach on Monday, you practice on Monday night, we teach the next thing on Tuesday. Really, I think a lot of what people describe is I'm bad at math. I don't think the human brain is capable of being bad at math. I think what is happening when people say I'm bad at math is that they got drug along with an average pace and were required to try and grow leaves before the roots were formed, and they just never had an opportunity to correct or address that. And if you try and build math more than anything other subject, I think, builds from the ground up like that. And if you advance people along, the way it manifests is to be like, I just don't get it.
Right.
And I think the design of math classes, just my opinion, contributes to that I just don't get it thing. I'm bad at math more than a lot of other things. And so it frustrates me when I hear about math teachers being particularly inflexible to these types of things, because it's not like they're crushing it.
I will say mapped learning progressions work really well in math because you are right. Some kids need to spend more time being introduced to the learning before moving on. And I think it's something that video games do very well. You're taught one skill at a time, and you can't physically get yourself to the next level until you master that skill. And there are a lot of content areas where, in my experience of working with teachers, when they switched, it's a lot of work to switch to this method of teaching because as a teacher, your brain is not used to it. You were not trained to do this. This is not how you learned. It's so foreign that it's frustrating, but once you learn to let your brain do it, man, the results are very impressive.
I should say, I had a lot of good math teachers who I really liked.
You did.
But all of them should be open to the possibility that the way math is taught is leaving people behind, because just ask people and they'll tell you, oh, no, I'm bad at math. And if that's your standard, if you think that they were really just born bad at math and there was nothing you could do, then I guess God bless you. But it should be a reason to be open to the idea that there might be a better way to do it.
All right. What do you think the next thing is, Jared?
We'll get angry letters from math teachers and then respond to them.
It's fine. I'm going to cut that 15 minutes down to like 2.
She didn't say anything mean. It's just me. All right. Anyway, double recap, real simple recap. They got to have a purpose for the homework. They got to feel, and that purpose should be to feel what it's like to not have done it. And then you can harness this with the small groups who will effectively, that are grouped by motivation and the speed at which they're going to pick it up so that they can move together through the mapped learning progression.
Correct.
And they're going to create their own homework for themselves, really.
They will.
Just as a natural consequence of that, because they want to achieve their goals together.
Well, as long as you're keeping the teacher pacing.
Yeah.
They'll want to be faster than it if the anchor activity is good enough. Yeah.
And then you can focus your personal intervention into the groups that really need it.
Yeah, and you've created a donut in your classroom, so all the teams are faced outward, so that your classroom isn't too loud because their sound is bouncing off.
We're introducing new content in the double recap now.
I know, but I can hear teachers in my head saying, "Well, now my classroom's really loud." Well, view previous podcasts where
this is
we
what I call
about the donut.
A flipped classroom is you turn the desks around. That's why it's called flipped.
You're making a joke.
That's a joke, isn't it?
Okay, recap.
No, that's a recap.
That's it?
Small groups, purpose, failure.
Yeah.
Harness.
Yes.
All right, I like it.
Okay.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Johanna, do you get questions from listeners ever?
Yes, we do.
How do those listeners send you questions?
They send us an email.
Where does that email go?
teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
But wait, what kind of 4? How do I do 4?
All of the 4s. They can do a number 4. They can write the word FOR, or they can do FOUR, even though that one doesn't quite make sense.
Well, perfect. teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
Yes.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life.